permitting process in Minnesota? Why or why not?
I do and I don't, and I think that we've heard arguments on both sides about why this is a challenging issue. And I think, yes, we do want to have those who want to start a business or have a dream of doing something be able to move forward. But it also makes clear what our system of regulations is about, and it's really about expressing our democracy, making sure that people will not be harmed by their neighbor or by someone else. And so we need to have those kinds of reviews, those kinds of processes where we can assess whether or not there's damage likely to happen. And so we also have to look at history. Mining is mentioned, and the history on mining often is that companies, although they may sign on to remedies for the future, they disappear, or they go bankrupt, or they aren't there to fulfill the requirements. And so we need to have extra care, especially when we're trying to protect our natural resources, which are hard to replenish, hard to make happen again once you've spoiled them or made them bad. And so we do need the regulations. We need to make sure that we protect people, but we need to make sure that we're not really adversely putting harm or hurting those who want to start a business, who want to do something to move forward. So it's a double-edged sword. It's a difficult thing to process through, and we need to make sure that we protect both sides.
Thank you.
Ms. Votz, we'll start with you. How will you work to balance rural and urban interests?
Well, I think separating the two groups and putting people on one side or the other is kind of part of our not very well functioning legislature in the last session. We need to look at both areas. I think that separates us, and I think we need to work towards, my district is a perfect combination of that, of rural and town. And the things that we need to do for both areas, many of them are the same. We need to work on schools. We need to work on transportation. We need to work on broadband. We need to do those things for both sides of the district. It really doesn't differentiate them in those reasons. But talking to farmers, sitting down and talking to farmers, that is what gives you the best idea of what needs to be done in a rural area. As far as the regular town part of it, or the city's part of it, those things are all best addressed by the areas that they're in. And so there's always going to be both areas in the legislature. We all need to work together to act like a community, like both of those areas are part of us.
All right, thank you. Mr. Draheim, how will you work to balance rural and urban interests?
They're intertwined. I mean, you look at our economy here in Minnesota. Ag is so important. Agriculture, construction, transportation are all big industries in our district. The processing, the ethanol, they're to me, job growth is one of our top priorities as a state. And, if you reevaluate how we do things as a state and prioritize what we're focused on, I think you can have a good balance between the two of them. And my district is primarily rural. And, transportation to and from, education, they should balance out. So, thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Dahl.
Well, I've been part of a rural caucus the 7 years that I've been in office. We meet every Tuesday morning at the legislature, about 25 of us, and we talk about those issues that are important to rural Minnesota. I consider myself a rural legislature. Some of my best legislation has been helping landowners or farmers out in Senate District 20. The Buy the Farm legislation that Representative Bly and I passed, taking on Xcel Energy, probably my most satisfying piece of legislation that I ever passed, by skirting around the committees on the last day to get that passed for some landowners out in Scott County. Forever Green initiative that David and I have passed and funded for the last 3 years. The Young Intern Farmer program that I introduced with the help of some Carleton students. So I consider myself a rural district. We certainly want to make sure that, and I'm very tired of any fighting that goes on between greater Minnesota and the urban districts. We certainly need each other. The economic driver for Minnesota is of course, the metro area, and much of the tax dollars that we get as a state comes from the metro area, but needs to be dispersed equitably throughout the state. Also, in terms of education, making sure that our rural districts get the same type of funding that the metro districts get. So those are issues that I've been working on. I'm very proud of that.
Thank you. Mr. Bly?
Thank you. Yes, and I agree with much of what's been said, and I think Marla hit the nail on the head when she said it adds to the polarization that we see in the legislature now when we divide our state, when we aren't thinking about the interests that go across borders. One of the things that I try to do as a representative is to notice what things do we share in inner city and rural areas that are problems that we could solve by getting together and trying to solve them together. We really are a diverse but one economy, and we benefit from growth and the strength of our economy in both the rural and urban areas. So all the things that we can do to make sure that we erase the differences and capitalize on the strengths and the unity that should be there. So there's been some talk about transit, for instance. Transit is kind of easier to see applications in the inner city, but it's just as important in many rural areas. And if we didn't have bus service here in Northfield like we do, there are many people who wouldn't be able to get around town, wouldn't be able to go shopping, and wouldn't have the advantages that they need. And I've had folks, business owners in town here, who say, I can't get the employees I need. And if we had a train that brought passengers in and out of town, they could come from greater distances and work here in Northfield, and I would get the kind of labor that I need that I don't have right now. And so I think there are many ways in which we share concerns and interests and challenges, and need to work on those.
Thank you. Mr. Wells, how would you balance urban and rural?
Well, I believe they all have their own distinct issues, but what it all boils down to is needs and wants, like I said earlier. And I think no one's arguing the fact that if Bemidji needs a water treatment plant somewhere up there and they need funding from the state, no one's going to hold that from them. Clean water is a priority. And likewise, if Burnsville needs additional lanes added to 35 to get over the freeway or to get over the river because it bottlenecks every morning, that's a priority. It needs to be taken care of. But I think where the rural and urban really get pit against each other is when they start throwing their wants into bills because they feel that they're needs. And I like to bring light rail up always as an example, mostly because light rail is looked at by some of these communities as a need, so it gets put on the state docket for the entire state to pay for, when I really believe that those local communities should be the ones paying for it, because it's not benefiting the other parts of the state. And as seen with this last session, when Southwest Light Rail was denied, that they actually could come up with the funds locally, and it is a want issue. And I think we really need to just get back to the wants and needs, put just the needs in the legislature, and everything will sail through without a problem.
Thank you.
All right, so we'll move on with Mr. Draheim. We'll answer this question first. Each candidate will have 90 seconds. Small businesses are today's job creators. What is the legislature's role in job creation?
Leave us alone. It's about the whole environment from a state. We've talked about good employees. We've talked about transportation to and from jobs. I find it ironic that we talk about a rail line coming to Northfield to bring workers here when we have all this mass transit in the Twin Cities. And the Twin Stadium had to bus workers in from out of state when we have plenty of people able to work in the state. But because of how much welfare we pay out, it's more profitable for them to sit at home on their couch than it is to get to work. So we need a little tough love across the state and to get people back working. More workers, better we'll all be. We'll have less tax burden, more people working. Hopefully, crime will go down. A whole bunch of statistics that prove it's better for society, more people working than not working. But government should assist small businesses work. And I find through my experience that a lot of government agencies are the stop police, don't do anything, and try to hinder small business more than assist them solve a problem. And I'm out of time, but thank you.
Mr. Dahl, same question.
Well, I was disappointed also that the governor vetoed this last tax bill because there was some good bipartisan support in terms of giving some business owners some relief. There was a $140 billion investment in reducing the statewide business property tax, which exempted the first $100,000 of the commercial industrial property tax for business owners. That's a good start, and I think we should continue. As we have a surplus, we can actually look at good tax policy. Also, some other things that we've done. The June accelerated sales tax reduction helps over 5,000 businesses by eliminating that. The upfront sales tax exemption for capital equipment, expanded tax credits like the angel investment tax credit, which was, I remember, introduced by Kathy Salzman, a Democrat, back in 2010. We also keep working at reducing property taxes for businesses and people. I think all of those can be some things that can move us going forward. We've talked about workforce development. I think that's also important. But I think we should continue to look at taxes in general and how they affect businesses so we can continue to attract good businesses in Minnesota and keep our economy growing.
All right, I'll reread the question from Mr. Bly. Small businesses are today's job creators. What is the legislature's role in job creation?
I don't disagree that small businesses create jobs, but I don't think that they're necessarily the only avenue for doing that. I think it's great when an entrepreneur comes forward with an idea and creates a business and moves forward. And there are many challenges, and I hope that we can reduce those challenges. But all that costs money. Even the tax breaks cost money. And if we are cutting taxes across the board and trying to help everyone and boost them up, we're going to run into trouble. We're not going to have enough revenue in order to do all of those things, plus repair bridges and roads and have schools. So I think we need to be strategic about how we're doing that. A problem that we face as well is that we have in our economy nationally, not just in Minnesota, but allowed large businesses and corporations to kind of take over the businesses and services in many small communities. And what happens with that is that the money that would be here gets funneled out into places like New York or Los Angeles or San Francisco rather than staying here in Minnesota and staying in local communities. And yet we still think that we should cut their taxes so that they can create more jobs. But and actually what happens is they reduce jobs. And so we need to figure out how do we invest, how do we get the revenue we need to provide the services and the support to small businesses so that they can create jobs, and that we can be assured that if we give them help that they will actually create jobs too. That's important as well.
Mr. Wells?
I agree with Rich's statement. I believe the government's role for creating small business help is to really get out of the way. For the small company that I work for, who only employs 6 or 7 people, the amount of time, energy, and cost that goes into complying with regulation could be put to better use by either hiring additional help, purchasing newer, more advanced equipment, or paying the workers that they have more money. And I believe it's just getting some of the regulations off of the small businesses' backs so that they can get to the business of actually running their business. Regulations is a big one for me.
All right, same question, Ms. Watts.
Well, we're all job creators. Everybody in this room is a job creator. What makes a good economy is where there are jobs, where people can buy things, because there is no economy without people having the ability to purchase things. That makes us partner with business, and that is a good thing. Partnering with business, legislature can support those businesses by having good schools, by having well-educated people, with apprenticeship programs, accessible education, having our homegrown training in place for those businesses, having transportation systems that can get workers to those businesses. If you can't buy anything, you can't support your local economy. So having jobs and reasonable wages is what's going to push our economy forward more and more. We always have to look at whether the business things that we are doing are for large business or are for small businesses. We do have to help our small businesses, but what we can really do is have an infrastructure ready to fill jobs for businesses, because that's the real economy.
Thank you.
All right, remember, each candidate will have 90 seconds to answer the following question, and we'll start with you, Mr. Dahl. Do you support increasing the gas tax or other taxes to increase funding for transportation or use general budget appropriations?
Well, I have voted for a gas tax. Matter of fact, in 2008, I was one of the, in the Senate and the House as well. We overrode Governor Pawlenty on a 6 3/4 cent gas tax. And when we did that, gas was $3.09 a gallon. We have about a $600 million a year problem in terms of just maintaining the roads, bridges, and infrastructure that we have right now. And I don't believe that $900 million surplus that we had last time is going to continue. $600 million of that was one-time savings from the federal government in terms of Medicare reimbursement. And so that's not sustainable. And so I'm okay with a nickel gas tax. Maybe it has to be a dime, especially since we've seen gas prices, over $3.50, the last 6 or 7 years. That's the only way that we can get to the issue of not only maintaining what we have, but also building out our whole transportation system. So the surplus is not going to remain. It's not sustainable. We need $11 billion before 2020 to try to keep up, and that'll help our economy and so forth. Plus, when you start rating the general fund, less money for schools, less money for nursing homes and seniors, and less money for cities and local government aid. So new revenue is necessary.
Thank you. Mr. Bly, same question.
I agree with almost all of what Kevin was saying, that we can't depend on existing funding to cover the great need that's out there. And of course, if we let the roads and bridges go unrepaired because we can't afford to do all of them, it gets more expensive. It doesn't get cheaper, it gets more expensive to do it. And so we'll need even more revenue going into this. I just want to make clear, too, that the gas tax does not at all fund transit or trains or whatever. That has to come from general fund money or from bonding. It doesn't come from the gas tax. So we're going to be taking care just of our basic roads and bridges needs if we increase the gas tax, and it can only go there, can't go anywhere else. I wanted to speak to one thing that was said earlier, though, about welfare recipients. And, our welfare system was reformed so that there are not people sitting around just collecting a check anymore. That's not the way it works. And to imply that people that twins bust in people because people wouldn't get off their couches to get a job is just a lie. It's not true at all. And I think the twins made the decision because they made contracts with people who could provide workers from elsewhere. It had nothing to do with trying to hire people here. I think it's disgraceful to imply that we have people in Minnesota who want jobs, who would take jobs if they were offered, are not willing to work.
Thank you. Mr. Wells, do you support increasing the gas tax or other taxes to increase funding for transportation or use general budget appropriations?
So I'm kind of an anomaly. I'm one guy on this side of the aisle, if you were going to split parties, that would actually be in favor of a gas tax, because I am for any kind of a tax that is a fair system. I believe right now that with license tab fees, basically what that is just an overreach of the rich or someone that has a nicer car. I would be in favor of a gas tax increase if and only if we were to make license tab fees a flat fee that everyone could afford. If someone has to pay $700-800 a year for license tab fees, I think that's ridiculous. I think what's really happening is we need a consumption tax where the people that are pounding more miles on their cars and beating up our roads should be paying more to fix them. So I'm in favor of a gas tax, but if and only if we make license tab fees a flat tax.
Thank you. Ms. Vatz, same question.
I would also be for a gas tax because we have to have a long-term plan. This is one area where you just cannot throw a patch at it with a little bit of money. We have gotten so far behind that we need to spend so much money just to get things back up to par. And we as Minnesotans know that political discussions do not stop bridges from falling. They do not stop highways from being, undrivable. This is just one of those things that has to be addressed. And if we want to put a long-term plan in and not have this come up every single legislature session, then we need to put a plan in place. And that will provide us sustainable funding into the future and keep these in working order. So I believe we have to do that. It's our duty as citizens to take care of this.
Thank you. Mr. Draheim, do you support increasing the gas tax or other taxes to increase funding for transportation or use general budget appropriations?
A couple things on that. First, to respond to Mr. Bly's comment about unemployment, maybe you should get out of your government bubble a little bit and talk to some employers, people that actually hire people, and what people that are on aid say to you when they come to apply for a job, or they quit because they can make more money on unemployment than they can working for you. But on transportation, I know Senator Dahl voted for the 16-cent a gallon gas tax increase. It goes back to budget and priority. I think it's kind of funny. We talk about priorities, and yet we still want to do light rail. Light rail is like $125 million a mile, and roads are what, $5 million a mile? Do the math. If you really want to fix roads and bridges, put light rail on hold. Focus on getting caught up, and the Republicans are part of the problem. Why we're behind? I no problem blaming us too. We're part of the problem, but it's priorities. But a little frustrating for me when I see and hear of that new bridge going over the St. Croix. They've been working on it for 20 years. Wonderful looking bridge. I don't know if you guys have seen pictures of it. They want to spend $1.7 million hiring a PR firm to promote the opening of the bridge. That's the stuff that drives me nuts. And I'm being told to stop. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, candidates, Mr. Bly, I'll start with you. What is your position on Minnesota business taxes, and what recommendation and or change would you support to help the business community?
This has come up in discussion a little bit before. I did carry a bill along with Senator Dahl for business owners in Northfield, trying to look at the differences between needs they have for restoration, or if you have an older building, there's more difficulty in kind of meeting the same, and yet you're charged the same property tax as someone in a newer building. And is there something we can do to help with that? And I think that's a good idea. I think it would be good if we could kind of even the playing field for those businesses. I think in general, as I said before, I support progressive taxation and not regressive taxation. And sometimes property taxes can become regressive, and we need to make sure that we're cognizant of that and look at that as an issue. Historically, property taxes, when we've looked at those, we've said, well, businesses are able to generate money, so they can have either a higher tax, or it's more logical for them to pay property tax. That isn't always true, and sometimes it can become a drag on a small business. I think we need to look, again, as I said before, the difference between large corporations and who have vast funds and ability to pay more taxes than small businesses. And so we have to balance all of those things out.
All right, thank you. Mr. Wells, the question for you.
Well, anytime you can lighten the tax load of any business, they can use that money in turn to reinvest into the business, hire employees, like I said, purchase equipment, and whatever else. So anything that we can do to lighten their tax load, I think, is something that we need to look at. I like to look at businesses through the lens of that businesses aren't there to pay taxes. Businesses are actually there to collect taxes. And I think if we kind of get our heads wrapped around that idea that businesses actually collect taxes from other people, and they really shouldn't be pouring all of their resources into paying their own taxes. So lightening the load for small businesses and making it easier for them to get by and to invest into their company.
All right, thank you. I'll read the question again. Ms. Votz, what is your position on Minnesota business taxes, and what recommendation and/or change would you support to help the business community?
Well, I think what David said is really really something that I would want to discuss and work on legislation for, and that is evening the tax code for small businesses and large businesses. My experience with large corporations is that any money that they save on anything doesn't really go towards the business. It certainly doesn't go towards wages. So that has to be taken into consideration. We also have to really know that we have been, as a state, talked about as one of the best states to do business in. We are growing, and there's not a whole lot that I want to change that because we are growing. We're doing well. Again, we have to concentrate on the very basic things that make businesses do well, and that is educated workforce. It's a school system that is good, so we have educated kids. Businesses are coming here. They're not leaving here. They're coming here because we are a good state to do business in, and because we put our money into our infrastructure and educational system. That's important to business as much as taxes.
All right, thank you. Mr. Drahan.
Well, I'd have to disagree with almost everything she said. Businesses are leaving. You just got to read the paper, okay? I mean, Lockheed Martin, Hartford Insurance, there's a whole bunch of companies that have left Minnesota because of the tax structure. And I'm not for cutting taxes across the board. We just need to take a time out. We don't need to constantly try to create new revenue for the state. We need to prioritize how we're spending money. There's almost every publication when you read about how Minnesota fits in. Wonderful state. I love Minnesota. Lifelong resident. I'm not moving, etc. So I'm not against Minnesota. But we are heavily taxed. Most people rate us third to fifth highest taxed state in the nation, which has worked out for us overall. But now we're running out of workers. People come here to do business because we had a great workforce. Well, what have we heard? We've heard that we don't have enough workers. So if we don't have enough workers and they're not trained, why would you come here and pay such high property taxes, high sales tax? I'm out of time. Thank you.
Thank you. And Mr. Dahl.
Well, yes, I did address the statewide business property tax, and if we eliminated it totally, we would have a $1 billion shortfall in the budget. But again, we did take a stab at that and $140 million relief, especially in the first $100,000 of commercial industrial property tax we have eliminated. And it's been 15 years since this has been put in place. And the property tax structure overall, because of pressures on either local government or schools, has caused us we need to relook at the statewide business property tax. And if we continue to have a surplus, then I would agree that there's one area that we can maybe make some changes. In terms of the corporate tax rate, it looks high at 9.8%, but with all our unique tax credits, deductions, and other incentives, we're actually at about 3 to 5%, which is actually average compared to other states. So Minnesota is a great place to do business. Corporations are coming here. In terms of the number of Fortune 500 companies that this state has, compared to even our surrounding states, it's great, and we're continuing to grow, and we'll continue to do well. But I'm certainly willing to look at the overall tax structure, and good tax reform can come into play as long as we have a budget that can allow that to happen.
Thank you.
All right, we'll start with Mr. Wells, 90 seconds for this question as well. If elected or re-elected, will you commit to elect new leadership to lead you in the House or Senate, different than the leadership of the past 2 years?
I would actually push for a change in leadership in the House. I believe that change is good and it gives a fresh look at things. I also believe that the power of the caucus is really kind of pitted left against right, and it really gets bottlenecks a lot of things. A lot of the process is held up because of the fact that Republicans are against the Democrats and whatever else. I believe that the power of the caucus has really kind of gotten out of hand, and we really need to work more as one unit rather than separate entities. So I would be in favor of changing our leadership.
Ms. Fotz?
It's difficult to say for me what the leadership should be. But I can say that we ended in gridlock this last session. So something has to change. I'm not sure if I would change our leadership, but I would really want to know that their approach would be to work together and to get things done. That's the most important thing. It's not so much the leadership, it's the approach to leadership that I would be looking at. Because we cannot end another session in gridlock. We cannot wait till the last minute. We cannot put all of the important issues on the last week of the legislative session. That should not happen. That's a time management issue, and I think that has to be addressed with whoever is the leader of either party.
Thank you. I'll reread the question. If elected or re-elected, will you commit to elect new leadership to lead you in the House or Senate, different than the leadership of the past 2 years? Mr. Draheim.
Well, I hope so, because if I get to vote on it, that means the Republicans took over the Senate. So, I agree with what's been set up here. We need people in St. Paul that want to work for the district and take their jobs with fiduciary responsibility. And if elected, my responsibility is for the district and for the people of the district, not for a party, not for whoever got me elected, wherever all that dark money came from, special interest groups. We need to represent the people and what's best for the district and the whole district. So, as far as leadership goes, we need people in there that are going to sit down, be able to look across the table at the other side and have an adult conversation. And I haven't seen an adult conversation in St. Paul in years. So thank you.
Okay. Mr. Dahl.
Well, the leadership currently, we have the governor, we have Senator Tom Bach and Representative Kurt Daudt. And you're right. They have a little too much power in terms of negotiating, especially last-minute deals. we've had the Come to Jesus meeting with Senator Bach in the last year, and I think he has improved in terms of communication, but I still think we can go further. I'd be interested to see who steps up to want to take on the majority leadership of the Senate, and I would hope that they would take on some of the reforms that I've asked for in terms of part of the Purple Caucus, that earlier deadlines, a fourth deadline, which means that conference committee reports don't come out on the last day of the session, that we all have a chance to weigh in on what that conference committee report, and breaking up those large omnibus budget bills into smaller pieces where we're not surprised by something that's in there at the last minute. So I would hope that the next leader of the Senate is someone that would take the reforms that I've recommended, along with my Republican and Democratic colleagues, that they could go forward and say, this is how the House and Senate should run. This is what the people of Senate District and Minnesota demand. And if you can't do that, I can't vote for you.
Same question for you, Mr. Bly.
Well, it's not that I disagree with things that have been said. I think people are expressing an idealism that government should work, and we want it to work. We want people to work together. It's not necessarily new with the leadership that we have right now that you have outside influences trying to pressure or push leadership in a certain way. I've seen it in the years that I've served that's happened. In my experience in my own caucus is that I think the leadership in my caucus has really tried to let individual legislators go the way that they'd like to go and to vote the way they want to vote on issues. I haven't felt the same kind of pressure that I've seen applied in the other caucus. I'm worried, though, and I think we see this nationally, that more and more people are feeling that they are not represented by their government. And I think that has a lot to do with the influence of money in our politics and how it's changed the way things work. I hope that, for looking at what happened with the Bernie Sanders excitement, and even with Donald Trump, people saying, I feel underrepresented, I want change, I want someone from the outside who's going to do things differently. It's an important message for us as politicians to listen to and hear and make sure that we are listening to people and we are trying to push for their interests. And I think that the influence that has been there has been that dark money, those corporations that push us in a direction that doesn't necessarily help local people, doesn't help individuals. We need to figure out how to listen and talk to them.
Thank you.
I'm going to skip my question and turn it over to Terry.
All right, thank you. Mr. Draheim, healthcare costs continue to grow at double-digit rates every year for individuals, businesses, and government. Has Obamacare and MNsure been successful? What policy changes would you recommend to help manage these increases?
MNsure, when I started running, to be real frank with you guys, I was concerned about health care, but I had no idea how bad it was throughout the district. Because most of the district has small businesses, mom and pop shops, we don't have large corporations like the Metro has that employ a lot of people. We have a few, Post here in town, and Cambria, and the Sewer Incorporated, and some others that employ a lot of people. But outside the government bubble and education bubble, there isn't a lot of large employers in our district. So it's a little different than a lot of places. We have a lot of people that are struggling to make ends meet because of healthcare costs. And we talk about how to pay for it, but we don't talk about why it costs so much. So we need to address why the costs are so high, why we're in MNsure to begin with. In 1975, 8% of GDP was spent on healthcare. It was a crisis. Last year, it was 17.5% of GDP was healthcare. Minnesota Department of Health predicts over the next 6 years, every year, costs are going to go up 7 to 8% every year. We got huge, major problems, and I'm out of time. Thank you.
Mr. Dahl, would you like me to repeat the question?
If you would, please.
Healthcare costs continue to grow at double-digit rates every year for individuals, businesses, and government. Has Obamacare and MNsure been successful? What policy changes would you recommend to help manage these increases?
Well, we do need to make some fixes. The Affordable Care Act has some good things in it. You can't be denied health coverage for pre-existing conditions, allowing your children up to age 26 to stay on that. And we have more people insured now than at any time in history of this country. But we do need to make some fixes there. MNsure is just the platform. It's an exchange. It shouldn't be blamed for the rising cost of health care. In 2010, when the Affordable Care Act came out, states had to choose whether to go on a national exchange or to create a state exchange. The Republicans were in charge for 2 years, and they did neither. I've never really seen what my opponent's plan is to try to get control of costs. And so we had to come in January when the Democrats took over, and we had basically 2 or 3 months to try to come up with the exchange and what it was. So it has some glitches. But the real drivers are the costs of health care, prescription drug costs. We certainly need to do more. I think we should allow more Minnesotans to purchase MnCare coverage. That's Minnesota Care. I think we should provide an alternative open enrollment for the individual market, and we should continue to work on the glitches that we see in MNsure. I prefer a single-payer plan, and I would actually rather see us get off of the current delivery of health care as we know it today.
All right, thank you. Mr. Bly, the question to you.
Yeah. So if we look at how other industrialized countries deal with this question, they have systems either like single payer or a nationalized health system like they have in England. They have far less cost than we do, and they're able to control their costs, and we can't. And we've relied on a market system that of insurance that actually increases risk for many people and increases costs. And that's what we're seeing. And Obamacare was an effort to try to bring some regulation, bring some something to bear against that free market and the insurance companies to have them serve the people that they sell insurance to. It hasn't really worked as I see it, which is why I intend to introduce a bill to have a single payer plan, the Minnesota Health Plan in Minnesota. I will have to see whether or not people get behind that or not, but I think it would provide a more fair, a system that would allow us the ability to control costs and actually be, I think, a magnet for business. I think businesses would want to come here to take advantage of the kind of health system that would be more fair, more cost controlled, and help people. So what we need, the first insurance company came in this country down in Dallas, Texas, to help a hospital be more secure, to come in and to reduce risk to people who might need to use that hospital. We need to get back to that sense of reducing risk for individuals.
All right, thank you, Mr. Bly. Mr. Wells, I'll repeat the question for you.
Great, thank you.
Healthcare costs continue to grow at double-digit rates every year for individuals, businesses, and government. Has Obamacare and MNsure been successful? What policy changes would you recommend to help manage these increases?
I don't believe either MNsure or Obamacare has been successful, and I really believe that MNsure, especially on its own, has just recreated the wheel and has been a debacle from day one. I believe that we should repeal MNsure and go on to this federal exchange, because right now that's the law. We have to abide by Obamacare, and stop the bleeding. Right now we're putting so much money and resources into something that isn't working for our state. So getting rid of that is a priority. And David said that Obamacare was there for regulating free market and whatever else, but I don't believe the free market actually gets a chance to work properly if it's so heavily regulated. In order for free market to work, it has to be an open process. And I would much rather see a process where people can choose what their insurance is, who their company is, what kind of coverage they want, whether or not they want to have it or not, and be able to get medical care actually more like your veterinary care than your doctor. Be able to shop around and actually go and have a list and see what your what you need done and actually see what your cost is going to be at different clinics so that you know ahead of time what your actual cost is going to be up front. So I think giving a chance for the free market to actually work and stopping the bleeding with MNsure.
All right, thank you. Ms. Fox?
When you talk about Obamacare, that has a very personal story for me. My husband had cancer for 8 years. If the laws had not got into effect when they did, our family could have been bankrupt very quickly. His insurance or his medical costs just for one medication were $8,000 a month. So therein lies the problem. Obamacare fixed a lot of those things, thank God, because I would not be in the place I am. I may not have my house if that had not been put into law. What I think we need is transparency. We need transparency, and I would agree with Aramis, we need transparency in cost. I just saw, I don't know if it was on the TV or it was an article about trying to find out how much it would cost for somebody to have a baby at a hospital, and they couldn't find out. That's the kind of thing we need to change, because if we want to bring the cost down, people need to shop around and have an honest bottom dollar that they would be paying. But honestly, taking Obamacare away, or even MNsure, I don't think we would gain a lot. We're still under the same set of laws of Obamacare. So that would not change whether it's a Minnesota exchange or a federal exchange.
Thank you.
Last question. Open-ended, what is one issue not being talked about in this race that should be aired or discussed? We'll start with Mr. Dahl.
Well, that's a good question. It seems like a lot of things have been talked about, and really important things like transportation, like education, like our business community and their ability to make a living and so forth. I'm surprised that we haven't talked about environmental issues as much, in this particular session. We certainly, there's a lot to talk about with water quality and air quality and climate change and long-term solutions. So, our environmental policies shouldn't just be border to border, but we have we need a worldwide discussion on that. So, I don't serve on any energy or environmental committees right now. I did serve on an energy committee my first 3 years in office, but it's pretty important to me, and I would hope that we can have good discussions going forward on what's the best source of energy for Minnesota, but also what are the best policies with good public input from regular citizens, with our farmers, with our business community. What's the best way going forward as coal plants shut down, as nuclear energy plants reach their end of their life? What kind of energy is going to be powering us for the next 50 to 100 years?
Mr. Bly?
I think the issue that I have not heard expressed or talked about at all today is housing, affordable housing for people. And I do hear from businesses that the shortage of affordable housing in many rural communities is a huge problem. And in order to bring in workers to the community, you need to have a place for them to live, or they have to travel great distances in order to take that job. And we have made some strides in the past couple of years of trying to help people find affordable housing. But more needs to be done, and some of it has to do with making sure that we subsidize or that we build housing that will be affordable for people. Also, increasing wages for people so they can afford housing is an important issue as well. So that's something I hope that we will continue to talk about and work on, not only for the citizens of Minnesota, but for small businesses too, so they can find the workers and have them in the communities that need to grow.
All right, Mr. Wells, what is one issue not being talked about in this race that should be discussed?
Well, I know today we've covered taxes every which way but left, but I'm going to go back into taxes and say fairness in taxing. The way that we tax people, and I kind of covered it a little bit before with my gas tax idea, where we need to really get rid of a variable license tab tax and make it more of a consumption tax. Likewise, I agree with property taxes. People that have retired and no longer have income are still paying the same in property taxes. I don't believe that's quite fair. I don't think that landowners, farmers that own thousands of acres of land, if there is a slight change in the value of their property and how it is taxed, how much that can actually affect them. I believe it needs to be more of a consumption based more off income rather than property, and gas tax, I believe it needs to be more off of gas and not license tab fees. Gas is a direct correlation with gas to the amount of how much our roads are being used and beaten up, and I really am in favor of more of an all-in on a gas tax rather than something else. So,
Ms. Watts?
I really think one of the issues is kind of far more general, and that would be civility in politics. Working in cooperation, talking about treating each other with respect. I think that goes a huge distance towards whether we have effective laws in place. My opponent at another forum, when we were all talking about sitting down, going through stuff, sitting down until you get it done, working together, he said more or less that in practice it doesn't really work that way. And I take that as an offense, that somebody that is representing the people of this area would say that there's really no place for that to really happen in reality. I reject that completely. In the private sector, we don't have the option to say that we just can't get along and we can't do it. When I go into a negotiation at my job, I'm not allowed to say, I don't like that person I'm negotiating with, so I'm just going to throw my hands up and walk away. That doesn't happen for us out there. It shouldn't happen in government either. The divisive kind of person that my opponent is, I think that time has come and gone and people are sick of it. They want a working, communicative government.
Okay, Mr. Draham?
Thank you. To me, one of the main issues I think that we've talked about, like a lot of things government likes to talk about but not act on, is mental health and just sheer number of beds for people that need help. And it encompasses all aspects of our state, all age groups, but we haven't really seen it tackled. We've seen committees, we've seen lip service, which we're used to, but no action. And I guess that's my frustration. Part of the reason I'm running is because I want to see something done, and how do you pay for all this stuff? I hear a lot of good ideas and some double speak from the experienced politicians. But the reason we don't have affordable housing is because everything costs too much. All the mandates that you put on new construction to build a house have cost, in the last 3 years, $33,000 in new mandates to the cost of a house. And we need to refocus our attention, get back to the basics. Roads and bridges, kids in the schoolroom, kids in general, and then public safety. And I throw mental health in there, and I appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, we've come up to our wrap-up closing remarks, and I'm going to make an executive decision and let Mr. Dahl, who has to teach class here in about 10 minutes. We don't want you speeding down the road and getting a traffic ticket. And we're going to give you 2 minutes for your closing remarks first.
Well, thank you, and as a driver's ed teacher, I will not be speeding down the road. But again, thank you for all coming, for all of you coming today, and I've enjoyed the discussion that we've had this morning and some really important issues. And I also want to thank, publicly my family, which they put up with a lot while all of us are out door knocking or attending forums and so forth. So I miss sitting down with my 3 kids and my wife, and as they try to maintain the household here this 28 days to go. I'm sure we'll survive. But I want to reemphasize, I consider it an honor and a privilege and a tremendous responsibility that the people of Senate District 20 have given me to represent not only this district, but Minnesota. I never take that for granted. I will continue to try to represent this district the best I can. I will continue to try to work across the aisle, which I believe that I've done. You can ask anyone at the Capitol. And I will continue to try to represent the best interests of the 2 sides of my district, which are so diverse. So I hope that we can move forward with some of the unfinished business. I was disappointed in how this particular session ended as well. I voted for a bonding bill. I voted for a tax bill. I voted for a transportation bill. And again, I'm disappointed that those are things that are left unfinished. We have a tremendous responsibility going forward to fix those particular issues, but also to create a budget for the next biennium. And so with your input, with your support, with working together with the House, Senate, and Governor, I'm looking forward to a next session if you'll give it to me. Thanks.
Thank you. Mr. Bly, 2 minutes for your closing remarks.
Well, thank you, and I too want to thank my family for their support in running for office, and to say that it is truly an honor to serve and be elected to represent this great district and a great state of Minnesota. I just want to, and just a quick aside, to thank candidate Draheim for mentioning mental health. I think that's an extremely important issue that we haven't brought forward, and we need to talk more about. However, we did do some things in mental health, particularly in funding mental health issues in schools and trying to bring back some of the needed care that should happen in schools. We can do much more, though, and there's a lot that's missing in that. My father lived to be only 43. He lived his whole life with severe diabetes. And he used his talents of being a newspaper reporter and photographer to be a good storyteller and tell good things. And he used his volunteer time to work with the disabled and to be a scout leader and try to inspire young people to do better. And my father believed, and he said to me that, everyone you meet has a gift and a talent that they want to give to society. And if you can help them find that and encourage them in that way, you've done a lot to better your society and your community. And that's something I've tried to do in my teaching. It's something I try to do in my legislating and representing the people of Northfield and District 20B. And I think it's something that we could all learn from. And I'm inspired by my father's efforts to make the most of his life, and that's something that I'm trying to do as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Wells, 2 minutes for your closing remarks.
You bet. Thank you guys for hosting this event. It was great to be here and see everyone that showed up this morning with coffee. Thank goodness. It was very early. So, but what I would like to say is one of the reasons I'm running is because I like to help people. Before I decided to do this, I helped people with the fire department. I got on community boards and organizations around town, and whether I win or not, I'm going to continue to do that and help people in the community. Last night, before our fire meeting, there was a lady that ran out of gas at the intersection. I ran out and helped her, and